She was only 5 years old! She was only 5 years old!
Their mother passed away during childbirth while giving birth to Katie. 5 years later, their father, drowning in massive debt, ended his own life, leaving Ruth and her younger sister Katie to fend for themselves. But their tough luck didn't stop there. Since their father had left behind huge debts, the bank was ready to take back their only home. 18-year-old Ruth stood firmly at the door, refusing to back down. The bank staff had no choice but to call the town sheriff. Then, something unimaginable happened.
Mac, I've got a gun in this house, and I swear to God, they come in this house, I'm gonna use it!
Little Katie, hearing her sister's words, quietly grabbed that shotgun and crouched by the staircase like it was a game. As the sheriff pushed the door open and entered their home, Katie pulled the trigger. Ruth hurried over and picked up Katie, who was knocked down by the recoil. Katie was just 5 years old, and Ruth refused to let her grow up carrying the weight of a police officer's death. So, Ruth took the shotgun and stepped outside. Afterward, Ruth brought Katie to a bakery. With tears in her eyes, she knew this might be the last time she'd share a meal with her sister. So, she told Katie to eat as much as she wanted. When she saw police cars surrounding the bakery, Ruth spoke softly to her sister.
I'm gonna go somewhere, okay? And I want you to stay here any way you can, okay? Okay? Katie, look at me. No matter what happens, I'm always gonna love you.
Ruth carefully shifted Katie's spot, so she wouldn't witness the police taking her away. After one last gentle kiss on Katie's head, then, Ruth turned and walked out of the bakery. Calmly, she knelt down and lay still, allowing the officers to take her into custody, accepting blame for the sheriff's death. 20 years later, Ruth was paroled from prison for good behavior, but in her broken life, only one hope remained, to find her sister Katie. However, the strict parole terms felt like a new prison: no crossing legal lines, no contact with former convicts. For Ruth, the cruelest rule was being banned from any interaction with Katie's adoptive family. To everyone, she was still the dangerous cop killer. If she broke the rules, she'd lose her freedom forever. Katie, the person she cared about most, felt so close yet remained out of reach because of her parole conditions. Just then, her parole officer Vincent handed her a business card, offering her a job at a seafood processing plant. After a moment of hesitation, Ruth accepted that glimmer of hope. Soon after, she was placed in an assigned halfway house, a temporary home for many women recently released from prison. The environment there was noisy and crowded, with all kinds of people coming and going. Coupled with the requirement to report to Vincent every Tuesday, Ruth instantly felt as though she had stepped out of one cage only to enter another. Before long, someone told Ruth there was a call for her on the shared telephone. When she answered, a cold, hostile voice hurled insults at her.
Cop killer.
Ruth didn't know who it was, but that icy anger left her deeply uneasy. Returning to her room, she found Mary, one of her roommates, rummaging through her backpack. Ruth didn't hesitate to teach her a lesson. 20 years in prison had taught her how to handle just about anything. She then hurriedly checked her backpack. Most of her belongings didn't matter to her, except for one thing: the photo of Katie taken when she was 5. That was something no one else was allowed to touch. Later, Ruth left the halfway house to look for work. Life now had its costs, and without an income, she couldn't survive in the city. But when she went to interview for a carpentry job, she was turned down on the spot because of her record killing a police officer.
I got my carpentry certificate. I did a year of welding.
I don't need birdhouses and stop signs, okay?
Faced with cold indifference and disdain, Ruth didn't try hard to recommend herself further. She knew no amount of talking could erase the judgment others had already formed about her. Meanwhile, the two sons of the sheriff, who had been killed years ago, reunited because of Ruth's release. The call Ruth had received earlier was from the older son, Keith, who swore he would make Ruth pay for what she had done. But his younger brother Steve had since married and started a family. He didn't want to dig up the past, believing Ruth had already paid for her crime. Steve tried to persuade his brother to let go of the hatred. Keith, however, not only refused his actions would later tear Steve's own family apart. Ruth had no idea that danger was already closing in. She arrived at the seafood processing plant Vincent had recommended. Inside, the fishy smell hung thick in the air, and most workers there were people on parole like her. They earned the lowest hourly wage, doing the toughest jobs. This was the place society had assigned her. Meanwhile, across town, Katie was driving home. She didn't notice the traffic light turning yellow and was hit by an oncoming car. Fortunately, Katie only suffered serious injuries. Nothing life-threatening. But after the accident, scenes from her childhood started flashing through her mind, vague and broken. She could only recall being held often by a woman, but she couldn't remember that woman's face. When Katie's adoptive father Michael and adoptive mother Rachel heard this, their expressions changed noticeably. They didn't want Katie to remember her early years, and they certainly didn't want her to remember Ruth. They decided to keep hiding the truth, letting Katie believe she was an orphan with no blood relatives. That decision became the biggest obstacle in Ruth's search for her sister. After her shift, a co-worker named Blake offered Ruth a ride. She could sense his kindness, but 20 years cut off from the world had built high walls of caution around her heart. Before long, Ruth went to a public library and secretly used a computer to search for any trace of Katie. But the internet gave her no leads on Katie. When she typed in her own name, however, the pages were flooded with old mugshots from her arrest 20 years earlier. She then clicked on a listing for her former home, now labeled a murder house, but saw it had been bought by someone a decade ago. Ruth took a bus toward her old neighborhood. Outside the window, the scenery silently overlapped with her memories, just like the ride home from school 20 years before. After walking several more miles, she finally stood in front of the old house etched with childhood memories. She didn't dare go inside, just let her eyes linger on every brick and board. Her mind drifted back to that phone call from the sheriff 20 years ago when he'd urged her to leave the house. If she had taken Katie and left then, she would have lost custody of her sister. But because she stood her ground, her life shattered instead. Just then, Liz, the woman living inside, noticed Ruth. Seeing the stranger staring intently outside the window, she grew wary and called over her husband, John. While Ruth was still lost in memories, John approached and asked if she needed help. Flustered, Ruth made up an excuse, saying she had once done renovation work in the house long ago. Sensing her unease, kind-hearted John unexpectedly invited her inside to look around. When the familiar furnishings came into view, Ruth's sealed-off memories came rushing back. But after a few questions from Liz, John quickly realized something was off.
You know the Balabands?
Before then when it was a farm.
Oh. Yeah, because we found some baby shoes in the wall.
Ruth instinctively glanced toward the wall, but even then, she insisted she didn't know them. Although Ruth refused to admit she had once lived there, every corner of the house was piercing her heart. As Ruth was leaving, John learned she had to walk to the bus stop and offered her a ride. In truth, he wanted to figure out why this evasive woman had really come. When they reached the bus terminal, John voiced his doubts.
Look, you've been lying since you said hello. Something's not right. Ruth, what's up with you?
Faced with his questions, Ruth finally told him everything. She and Katie had lived in what was now John's house. After their parents died, she went to prison, and Katie was adopted. Over 20 years, she had written thousands of letters, never a single reply. Ruth didn't even know if Katie was still alive, which explained her awkward visit today. However, in the midst of opening up, Ruth kept one crucial truth from John. She never mentioned that she had been sent to prison for causing the death of a police officer. By the end, Ruth was heartbroken. Holding back tears, she stepped out of the car. But after walking a few paces, she heard John call out to her.
Ruth, look, it's tricky what you're trying to do. I'm gonna see if I can help you out. Here you go. Give my office a call.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Meanwhile, after being discharged from the hospital, Katie returned to her adoptive parents' home. Once her parents left for work, her younger sister Amy gently took care of her. The two sisters, though not related by blood, were deeply close and often shared secrets with each other. Katie suddenly brought up those fragmented memories again, like a recurring dream, but she still couldn't remember who the woman was. Amy then suggested she help her sister look for the truth. Katie, however, softly shook her head.
But why not? Because you guys are my family.
Yeah, but aren't you curious? Don't you want to know anything about your past?
I don't need proof that I'm more fucked up than you are.
Well, don't get pissed.
Sorry.
On her way back to the halfway house, Ruth noticed a house being renovated. Gathering her courage, she pushed the door open and asked if they were still hiring carpenters. The foreman wasn't looking to bring anyone new on, especially a woman whom he doubted could handle the work, but Ruth pointed out a precise issue with the doorframe. Impressed by her solid carpentry skills, the crew unexpectedly offered her a second job. Yet Vincent soon delivered a harsh reminder about the limits of her parole.
So this guy knows you're an offender, right?
You didn't ask.
Well, why is he willing to trust you?
That said wall you're leaning against? I built it in 45 minutes.
You better tell your boss who you are.
Why? I gotta be a convict wherever I go?
No, you're a cop killer everywhere you go, yes. Sooner you accept it, the better.
That blow shattered any sense of luck Ruth had clung to. For the rest of her life, she would have to move forward wearing invisible chains. After her shift that day, Blake once again offered her a ride home. This time, Ruth didn't refuse. Along the way, they talked about light topics, and a long-absent smile finally appeared on Ruth's face. That moment together gave her a glimpse of another possible future. But tragedy had never truly left her. Not far away, Keith was watching every move, his eyes fixed on the scene. Late that night at the renovation site, Ruth was looking at Katie's photo with tears in her eyes when she suddenly heard footsteps coming upstairs. Alert, she grabbed a pipe wrench and carefully made her way down. It was Blake, holding a box of donuts. He had meant to bring her something to eat, but it seemed his kindness had come off awkwardly. Then he pulled out a heavy coat he'd brought along.
Probably a jacket? Why?
Well, just so you'd be warm.
When Ruth put it on and found it fit perfectly, she stayed silent, not saying thank you. Still, that long-missing warmth began to seep into a heart that had been cold for years. Later, when Ruth tried calling John, no one answered. She realized immediately John must have learned what crime she had committed.
Don, it's Ruth. Again. I didn't give you the whole story, and I'm sure by now you worked out all the parts I left out. Please give me a chance to explain. You know, for 20 years I wrote thousands of letters. I did everything I could to reach her the way that the system wanted me to, but I didn't hear anything. I don't want to disrupt her life. And I'm not looking for a second chance. I just want to know that she's okay. If I told you the full truth, you wouldn't have offered to help me, and I know that's not an excuse, but I really need your help. If I could just, maybe just talk to the parents. Please, John, she's my sister. Thanks.
Though John still didn't respond, a flicker of hesitation stirred inside him. After returning home, John talked with his wife about Ruth. Liz was upset that Ruth had hidden her past.
She was in my house with our children.
Yeah. And you're right. I should have told you when I found out. I'm sorry.
Yeah. When a murderer talks her way into my kitchen to relive the moment, yeah, you should have told me. Shit, John.
I can't tell you what to do professionally, but you keep her shit away from here.
Even so, he decided he would keep helping Ruth. One day, Keith went to see Steve again. Furious, he complained to his brother that ever since Ruth killed their father, their mother had drowned her grief in alcohol. They had lost their home and been left adrift. Their lives had fallen apart from that moment on. Now, seeing Ruth not only free but also finding work and even a man, Keith felt it was all unbearably unfair. His resentment was like a corroded chain, and seeing their mother now bedridden and dependent on a ventilator, Steve felt compelled to change his original stance. When Ruth was about to finish work, Steve quietly entered the renovation site. Mistaking him for a new helper, Ruth told him to come back the next day as she was clocking out. But Steve didn't leave. Instead, he asked her a few probing questions.
Really nice work in here. Your parents must be proud.
I don't know. They're dead.
That's rough. Your parents dying.
Yeah, but life goes on, right? Look, I really appreciate the help, but I need to get going.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to hold you up.
After Ruth departed, however, Steve emerged from a hidden spot on the first floor. He returned to where she had been working and suddenly noticed a notebook she had left behind. Its yellowed pages were filled with longing for Katie, and inside was tucked that photo of her as a child. Steve's heart raced with a bitter thrill. He had finally found Ruth's most vulnerable spot. Now he could make her feel the pain of losing someone she loved too. Later that day, when Ruth returned to the halfway house, she found Vincent waiting for her at the door. He had come specifically to warn her after learning she had hired a lawyer.
I'm getting information you got yourself a lawyer. What you think that's gonna do, huh?
It's none of your business.
It's none of my business.
No,
Trying to contact your sister?
it's not right.
No, you lost those rights 20 years
It's
ago.
my fucking family.
Blood doesn't make you family, Ruth. Get that shit out your head. It's the reason why your sister hasn't contacted you. You're a convict. All she knows of you is as a killer. She's probably scared of you. Let that girl live her life. Your life starts here now, not 20 years ago. She's actually better off without you.
Ruth stayed silent, then turned and went inside. In the days that followed, she and Blake grew closer. This sincere man, with his patience and gentleness, slowly began to melt the walls around her heart, letting her taste the possibility of love for the first time. That day, while having a meal together, Ruth decided to tell Blake the truth about her past. She didn't want their relationship to be built on lies.
I was in prison. I just got out.
Shut up. Why would you say that?
I was in for 20 years.
For what?
Sheriff. Sandra Sheriff. Murder.
An accident?
Blake's expression instantly froze, and he began stumbling over his words, offering awkward apologies. Ruth didn't blame him. She simply stood up and left quietly. Alone on the street, the glaring light stung her eyes, and tears finally began to fall. As long as she carried the label of a cop killer, she would never deserve the ordinary happiness others could have. And so, her first chance at love ended almost before it began, shattered by her own honesty. A week later, Katie's adoptive parents received a lawyer's letter from John. But Michael wasn't worried. If Ruth dared to approach Katie, she would end up back in prison, because that was the rule of her parole. They were determined never to let Katie have any contact with a murderer. Outside the door, however, Amy overheard the whole conversation. Once her parents left for work, Amy secretly found the legal letter. Shocked, she slipped into the basement and discovered a dusty wooden chest. Inside were over 2,000 letters that Ruth had written to Katie over the years. Meanwhile, at the seafood plant, Ruth received a call from John. But just as she answered, someone suddenly attacked her from behind. The attacker was Nevier, whose own father, a police officer, had died in the line of duty. She deeply hated Ruth for having killed an officer. Throughout the assault, Ruth never fought back. She knew that if she did, no matter the reason, she would be sent back to prison. After it was over, she simply returned to her workstation and kept working. The toughness she'd learned over 20 years in prison taught her to endure pain in silence. Blake watched her from a distance, his eyes filled with regret. After their shift, he tried to approach her and explain, but was met only with Ruth's resolute turn back. The day arrived for Ruth to meet Katie's adoptive parents. Ruth carefully straightened her clothes and tried to cover the bruises on her face. Then, arranged by John, she finally came face to face with them. Michael spoke first. He explained that when Katie was adopted, she was deeply traumatized, but now she had a stable life, a loving family, and even a talent for playing the piano. He begged Ruth not to disturb the peace they had built. Ruth's voice trembled slightly as she replied with caution.
My mom died having her, so I raised her. from a baby. Dad didn't do anything before he gave up. He quit. I didn't. I don't quit. Not on Katie. But life doesn't start at 5. Those are big years.
Her words touched them, but they still held firm to their refusal to let Ruth see Katie.
Whatever her life was like before, and I'm sure there were good moments, they were obliterated by what you did.
Does she really not remember me?
She doesn't.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that she doesn't remember me. Does she know about the no contact order?
Ruth, calm yourself down.
Does she?
I think maybe you should move on to something else.
Then, Ruth suddenly asked about the letters. When she learned they had never let Katie read a single one, her composure finally shattered.
What did you do to my letters? Did you throw them away? Did you burn them? Look at me when I'm talking to you!
In a surge of anger, she chased after them, her furious shouts echoing through the entire building. John rushed to hold back the outtide to fight control Ruth, afraid that in her rage she might do something that would send her back to prison for good. Finally, Rachel turned and told her they hadn't burned the letters, they had only hidden them. Not wanting Katie to remember the past, Ruth pleaded with them to at least tell Katie about her. But they walked away, resolved never to allow Ruth to see their daughter. When Ruth finally calmed down, John softly apologized. There was nothing more he could do. Meanwhile, under the dim lamplight, Katie and Amy sat reading the letters their parents had deliberately hidden. These letters were like a silent witness, telling a story of a sister who never gave up on loving her younger sibling. In that moment, Amy finally understood that the dangerous killer their parents spoke of was actually the person who loved Katie most in the world. Back at the construction site, Ruth frantically pounded the wall, wood chips and tears scattering through the air. But none of it could change the fact that she couldn't see Katie. The next day, while Ruth was still grieving her inability to meet Katie, Blake quietly approached her. This time, he didn't apologize. Instead, he calmly revealed his own identity. He was also a parolee, released a year and a half ago, and he too had to report to a parole officer every week. That was why he had frozen. Simply being seen together already violated their parole conditions. Blake's honesty dissolved Ruth's anger, though it also meant their romance could go no further. After work, Ruth suddenly received a call from Amy, who confessed she had read the letters and decided to reach out. They arranged to meet the next day in a park. While waiting for Amy, Ruth kindly picked up a glove a little girl had dropped. Her gentle gesture was seen by Amy, instantly confirming Amy's belief that Ruth was a good person. The two then shared an open and honest conversation on a park bench. Ruth spoke of teaching Katie how to tie her shoes, and Amy shared funny stories about life with her sister. As they parted, Amy quietly revealed a crucial detail. Katie had a piano rehearsal that afternoon at the concert hall downtown. Ruth could go and see her, just from a distance. Hearing this, Ruth's eyes welled up. After 20 years of waiting, she finally had a chance to lay eyes on Katie again. However, while Ruth called John to ask if she could secretly go see Katie, she didn't notice that Steve had followed Amy home, planting a seed of danger that would soon grow. When Steve returned home, ready to tell his wife he might leave for good, he heard their baby crying in the crib. But upon opening the bedroom door, he witnessed his wife's betrayal with none other than his own older brother. He gently put the child down and took one last look at the woman he once loved before walking away, heartbroken. If Ruth hadn't been released, Keith would never have come to his city, and none of this would have happened. So Steve placed all the blame on Ruth. He then went to his mother's house, where he found his father's old service weapon. Unable to reach John by phone, Ruth made her way to his house. Liz, however, was still angry about Ruth's criminal past and the earlier deception. She demanded that Ruth leave immediately. Desperate, Ruth pleaded with her, admitting her mistakes and apologizing again and again. All she wanted to know was whether she could go see Katie alone, or if she needed a lawyer present. But even as they argued, Liz refused to tell her where John was. In her distress, Ruth's emotions finally overflowed.
John looks at you and he sees someone who deserves a second chance. I don't see that. I hear someone who will say anything to get what she wants.
You would do exactly the same thing for your kid.
Don't go
exactly.
there. Don't even pretend this is about her.
Exactly, I was protecting her.
You are not a victim.
I said
all right?
I
That's
did
bullshit.
I had to make a choice.
You traumatized her. Do
I
not even
fucking said I did
this
it.
is about her.
She was only 5 years old. She was only 5 years old.
Suddenly, Liz realized that Ruth might not be a cold-blooded killer, but a sister forced into an impossible choice years ago. After hearing Ruth's full story, Liz herself got into the car and drove Ruth toward the concert hall downtown. Meanwhile, under the stage lights, Katie's hands hovered above the piano keys. Her adoptive parents sat in the front row, smiling warmly as they listened to her play. Just as Ruth arrived outside the concert hall, Steve called her. He told her he had kidnapped Katie and ordered Ruth to come alone to an address he provided. Panicked, Ruth lied to Liz, saying Katie's performance had ended and they were at a different location. Unsuspecting, Liz drove Ruth to the given address. When they arrived, Liz realized it was an abandoned construction site. Ruth could no longer hide the truth. She told Liz that Katie had been taken. Terrified, Liz retreated into the car to call the police, while Ruth walked alone into the site.